Masechet Zevaḥim Daf Sadi Bet. We begin the 11th Perek. Mishnah teaches Dam Chatat Shenitaz Al Habeged Hareze Ta'un Kibus. There is a law that we derive from the Torah that blood of a Chatat offering that is sprayed onto a garment, any garment, it has to be laundered. The source is from these Pesukim right here in Vayikra chapter 6. Daber el Aharon ve'el banav lemor zot Torat hachatat. This phrase, this word Torat will be important in just a minute. So we're talking about a chatat offering, and first it tells us, we know that olah has to be slaughtered in the north, and so too the chatat in the northern part of the courtyard. It's Kodesh Kadashim. And here we go. Unlike the olah, the kohen who offers it can eat it. In fact, any kohen can eat it. B'makom kadosh, it shall be eaten. So notice these two words, yochelena and te'achel. Those also would be important in our discussion. Kol asher yiga bibsara yikdash. Anyone, whatever it touches, his flesh will become holy. V'asher yizeh midama al habeged, asher yazeh aleha, techabes b'makom kadosh. Here is the main source for this Mishnah, that any place where the blood is sprinkled on the garment, you shall wash that which was sprinkled, and you have to wash it b'makom kadosh. You have to wash it in the courtyard. So the main idea here is that you're not allowed to take this sanctified blood of a korban chatat outside the courtyard. So let's say it gets onto some cloth. Now that cloth has the blood in it. If you take that cloth outside of the courtyard, you're taking the blood outside the courtyard. So therefore, you have to do the wash inside the courtyard to get the blood out. And only then you can take that clothing outside of the courtyard. The next halacha is also relevant. Uchli cheres asher tibusha bo yishaber. If you cook the korban chatat in a earthenware vessel, you're cooking it because the kohanim eat it. So good. They're allowed to cook it. They cook it in the courtyard. They eat it in the courtyard. Now, what are you going to do with that vessel? It has blood that is inside it, that's absorbed in it. Well, that has to be broken. Number one, it's not kosher because it's going to be notad. But furthermore, if you take it outside, you're taking the blood outside. And so too, if it's metal, then it has to be scoured and rinsed in water. This pasuk also is going to be relevant in this discussion. So now we go back. Dam chatat. This is true for chatat in particular. The blood has to be washed out. Even though it's Now, this pasuk is talking about chatat offerings that are eaten. That's any korban chatat that's sprinkled outside, in the outside mizbeach, and not those that are sprinkled inside. Those where you sprinkle the blood inside the kodesh, those are not eaten. So we know that this pasuk primarily is talking about korbanot outside chatat offerings that are eaten, because it says in the place where you eat it. So these are being eaten. However, we learn that this law that you have to launder clothing applies echad not only to those that are eaten, which is the primary source, but we're going to derive also that inside korbanot that are not eaten, also, if the blood gets on clothing, it has to be washed. How do you know? Because it says the word Torah, Torah chatat, and that teaches that there's one law for any korban chatat. What about a bird chatat? The Gemara will discuss that. Chatat vesula and damab ta'un kibus. Ben shaita la shata kosher, ben shelo haita la shata kosher. This law that you have to launder is only if it's a valid korban chatat. But if the korban chatat becomes invalid, then that blood that goes on clothing does not need to be laundered. And it makes no difference whether the chatat was valid and became invalid, or whether it never had a time when it was valid. What are those two scenarios? Ezohi shaita la shata kosher shelana v'shenitme'a v'sheyasat. It has a time that when it was good, if it went over time, so that on the first day when you do shechita, then it was valid. The korban was perfectly valid that day, but then it was left overnight. So it was valid, now it's not valid. Or it was tahor and then became tameh later. Or it was valid and then it was taken outside of the temple courtyard. So that's all the first category. Ve'ezohi shelo hayta lashata kosher. What are examples where it was never valid? Shenishchata chus lizmana v'chus limkoma v'shekibelu pesulin et dama. If at the time of shechita he had intention to consume it outside of the time or outside of the place, or if the person who received the blood was himself a disqualified kohen for temple service. In all these cases, already from the time of the shechita, or the Kabbalah, it was already no good. So this blood was never valid. Dam hatat shenitaz vi Torah achat lechol hataot afilu chatata of nameh. Now you said in the Mishnah that since it says the word Torah achat, one law for all, and that applies not only to eaten chatat, but also to the inside korban chatat, because it says one law. Well then, why don't we include also bird offerings? And if you think maybe we do, we don't. Alamat tanya yachol teheh dam chatat ha'of ta'un kibus Talmud lomar zot. Braita teaches you might think that the blood of a bird chatat, also if it gets on clothing, will require laundering. No, that's why it says zot. Zot is a limiting word, and it limits, not the bird. Now we have to wonder, why are we excluding the bird and including the inner offerings? We're going to see three different opinions, three different explanations and sources. Amar Resh Lakish mishum bar kapara. Amar kera tishachet benishchatot hakato medaber. Resh Lakish says, you know why we're going to exclude the bird? Because it says tishachet, when it said that in the place that you slaughter the olah, so too you slaughter the hatat. So you see that this is talking about animals that are slaughtered and not birds that get milikah and not shechita. והמה בנאכלות הכתוב מדבר כדכתיב במקום אשר תאכל אבל פנימיות לה. Wait a second, but I understand that you want to exclude birds because of the word tishachet, but just as easily you can exclude the pinimiyot, because you could say, oh look, the pasuk is talking about korban chatat offerings that you eat, as it says in the place, holy place, you shall eat it, and then you could say pinimiyot, the inside korban chatat, is excluded from this law. You don't have to launder. Well, how come we don't do that? Rabbe Rachamana Torat, because the word Torat is an inclusive word. So even though the pasuk says it's eaten, but Torat says also those that are not eaten. Well, once you're including other categories, so why not include chatat ha'of? I know the primary pesukim are talking about shechita. Then why not say Torah is coming to include also birds? No, mi'et rachamana zot. But the word zot is an exclusive word, so it's limiting and saying not birds. Now, mara'ita. Now, why did you decide to include pinimiyot but exclude birds? You have one word, zot, that's limiting, and the word Torah that's inclusive. So why are you deciding to include this and exclude that? Maybe it should be the other way around. מסתברא דחטאת בהמה פנימיות הבעלה לרבויה שכן בהמה שחיטת צפון וקבלת כלי וקרן ואספה וחודה ואישים. It makes more sense that although the primary sources here in the Pesukim are talking about external behema, it makes sense that when it says Torat, you should include also inside animals, inside korban hatat. Why? Because they have a lot of similarities. Both inside and outside animal korban hatats are, by definition, they're animals, and you do shechita on them in the north for both types of korban, of inner and outer korban hatat offerings, and you receive the blood in a vessel. All these things are not true for a bird. A bird is not an animal. You don't do shechita at all. Certainly not in the north. You don't have to do melikah in the north, and you don't receive its blood. You sprinkle the blood directly from the bird's body. Vekeren, ve'etzba, vechuda, and you put the blood of an animal chatat all the way up on the corner, on the horn of the mizbech, and you you do it with your finger, and you do it on the edge of the corner, so that then it goes on both sides, and both are put in the part of a korban chatat is burnt on the fire. And that's not true for the bird. The bird, we don't put it up, a bird chatat is put below the line, not up on the corner, and none of it is burnt. It's all eaten by the Kohanim. And so this is a lot of similarities between the two animal sacrifices, and the bird chatat does not have any of these characteristics. Adrabah, chatat of havelel rebuye sheken chutz kemota ve'achila kemota. Hold on, we can compare the outer korban chatat animal to a bird chatat in that they have these two similarities. They are both done on the outside mizbeach and not on the inside one, and also they are eaten. Both of them are eaten, unlike the pinimiyot, which are not eaten. So why not say, let's include chatat ta'of, because it has these two similarities? And the answer is hanach nefishin. This is only two similarities. This list was a lot longer. And therefore, although you're right, we have two words, Torah is to include things, and Zot is going to exclude things, and we have to pick one or the other. It makes sense to include that which is more similar, and that's going to be chataot pinimiyot. Okay, all that is one derivation for why the bird offerings are excluded from this law that requires laundering. Now, the second one, Rav Yosef Amar Kera. Rav Yosef Amar Kera. Yochelena lezo velo leacheret benechalot mi'ayet hakatub. Since the pasuk says, you shall eat it, not just you shall eat, but you shall eat it, you shall eat this, and that's a limiting word, this, and not something else. Something else that is eaten will be excluded. So what is it including? Well, the context here is the external animal chatat, which are eaten, and this one that's eaten, but not something else that's eaten, that's excluding the bird. Ve'ela zot lamali. Well, if you already have an exclusive word, yochelena, only it, then why do I need zot to also be an exclusive word? Ilav zot hava amina yochelena or chedikra kamashmalan. If I didn't have the word zot as a limiting word, I might have read yochelena as the normal way of speech. Eat it. I wouldn't have known that it's coming to exclude something. So zot, which is clearly a limiting word, that says you have to limit something. And then when I want to know, well, what should I limit? I'll look to Yochelena and know that I should read Yochelena as eat it, and do not apply this to something else that is eaten. That's how we know that birds are out. That's the second derivation of this law. And now a third. Rabba Amar Kera Asher Yizeh Bazaot HaKatur Medaber. Rabba is going to shift our reading of the Pesukim completely and say that actually these Pesukim in Vayikra Vav are talking about Chatat HaPinimit. That's the first place that is talking, that's the primary focus here. And how does he know that? Because the pasuk says, Asher yizeh, that which is sprinkled. Look over here, it says in this pasuk, Asher yizeh midama al habeged, Asher yizeh aleha techabes b'makom kadosh. Now it says regarding chataot pinimiyot that blood is sprinkled, uses the same verb. Whereas the outside korban, the korban chatat that's done outside, it actually says v'lakacha kol midam hachatat bespo v'natan al kanot mizbach ha'olah. It says natan, placement, not yizeh. And therefore, actually, the first law that we know, the fundamental law, is chataot ha'pinimiyot. And so the chatat pinimiyot, from that we will learn also the external chatat, but not birds. We ask, והתניא אף על פי שאין הכתוב מדבר, אלא בנחלות לעניין מליקה ושטיפה, אבל לעניין כיבוס אשר יזה כתיב. I'm going to ask you a question from a Baraita, Rabbah, because Baraita teaches that even though the pasuk, pasuk only talks about chataot that you eat, not the ones that are burnt, not the pinimiyot. So here, this Baraita assumes that the primary focus of these pesukim is ne'echalot. The answer is no. That's only talking about the midika ushtifa. the washing, that you have to wash the vessels, that you have to wash the metal vessels, and you have to break the earthenware vessels. So that is the pasuk that comes after that, because that pasuk says anything that you're going to cook it in. Well, if you're cooking it, you're only cooking it because you're going to eat it. So clearly, pasuk 21 is in fact talking about ne'echalot, outside korban chatat offerings. Yes, that's true. And this baraita that says, this is talking about ne'echalot, is talking about pasuk 21. But pasuk 20 that says the word yazeh, that is talking about hataot hapinimiyot. It says asher izeh. Yachi echad ha'ne'echalot v'echad ha'pnimiyot, echad ha'pnimiyot v'echad ha'ne'echalot miba'eleh. If so, Rabbi, that you're right, how can you explain the language in the Mishnah? The Mishnah says whether it's eaten or whether it's inside. It should say whether it's an inside korban or whether it's eaten. In other words, we start with the primary one that we know from the Pisukim directly, and then the other one that is derived. So the answer is teneh, echad ha'pnimiyot v'echad ha'ne'echalot. Okay, change the wording and teach the Mishnah as saying whether it's the pnimiyot, that's the primary one, that's the yazeh, that for sure we know you have to launder the clothes, and then we're going to add in also hane'echalot, because it says Torah. It says Torah for all of them, and so that's how we would know. So you're going to read it like this. Zot Torah chatat. There's going to be a generality, and the pasuk here it says Yizeh midama. That's pnimiyot. You have to wash the clothing. Since it says Torah, now I know also the external are included as well. Now we ask, according to you, Rabbah, Yachi chatat ha'of nameh. Now, since you're including some things from the word Torah, why not also include birds? We had rachamana zot. Now we have a limiting word, zot. Yachi chitzona namila. Why not apply zot to the outside chatat offerings and exclude those? Riba rachamana Torah, because we have an inclusive word Torah. Omaraita. Why did you decide to include the external korban chatat and exclude the birds? מסתברה חטאת בהמה הבעלה לריבויה שכן בהמה שחיטת צפון קבלת כלי קרן ואצבע וחודה ואישים אדרבה חטאת העוף הבעלה לריבויה שכן הזק כמותה הנח נפישין. And so again we answer as we did above that the korban pinimiyot, the animal that's inside and the animal that's sprinkled outside, have a lot of different common denominators, and those common denominators are more than the chatat ha'of has with the pinimiyot. And therefore, we should go with the ones that are the majority. We know that one has to be included, one has to be excluded, and so we're going to include the one that has more similarities and exclude the one that has only a couple of similarities. Ba'e Rabbi Abin, chatat ha'of shechnis dama besavara bifnim mahu, savara kechli sharet dame umifsil, או דילמה כסבר בהמה מדמה אמר החמנה ולא בשרה. The following question of Rabbi Abin is dependent on knowing this pasuk that it actually quotes regarding a korban chatat of an animal. The pasuk says, "V'chol chatat asher yuva midama el ohel moed lechaber b'kodesh lo te'achel ba'esh tisaref." If you have an outside chatat offering, then it has to be done everything outside in the courtyard. If that chatat, if you bring the blood into ohel moed, it's no good. Lo te'achel, it cannot be eaten. That it's an outside korban, and otherwise, if you do everything properly on the outside mizbeach, it can be eaten. But if you take that blood inside, it's not supposed to be inside, it cannot be eaten, it has to be entirely burnt. So we learn from here that an animal chatat, you're not allowed to bring inside, and if you bring it inside the sanctuary, it will be no good. However, the halacha is midamah. The pasuk says from its blood. What if the entire animal goes into the sanctuary somehow, and the blood is still inside the animal? Well, then it says it's okay. It does not become disqualified if the blood is in the animal. Only if the blood is in a vessel and goes into the sanctuary, only then does it become disqualified. That's the law for an animal, that we know. The question is regarding a bird offering of a chatat, where the blood went in while in the neck of the bird. For a bird chatat, you don't put the blood in a service vessel first, but rather you sprinkle it directly from the neck of the bird onto the mizbeach. So now, someone somehow brought the bird with the blood inside the bird into the sanctuary. What do we say about that? Do we say that the neck of the bird is the same as the service vessel? Since for an animal, you're going to bring the service vessel, you use the service vessel, you put the blood in there first, and that you're going to use to sprinkle on the mizbeach, and here you do it directly from the neck, and therefore it's equivalent, and so bringing the blood in the neck of the bird into the sanctuary will make it pasul like an animal blood that's in a vessel? Or do we say that the being in the neck of the bird is the same as being in the neck of the animal? And in the case where it's in the neck of the animal, the pasuk says it's okay, only if it's the blood itself, but not the flesh. And even if the blood is in the flesh, that is okay for an animal, and therefore it will not make it invalid for the bird either. Tashema. Let's answer it from this baraita. Pirkesa v'nichnesa lifnim v'hazra keshera. Ha'ichnisa pesula. The baraita teaches that if a kohen did milika on a bird and then it convulsed, after you kill it, then its nerves go crazy and it starts moving on its own, and the bird went with its own convulsions, went into the sanctuary and then came back out, that's okay. Well, what can we learn from this? From the fact that it used this example of it convulsing and going in by itself and going out, that means ha'ichnisa pesula. That means if a kohen brought the bird after the milika, he brought the bird into the sanctuary knowingly and brought it out, it's pasul. Only if it convulses and goes in by itself and comes out, then it's okay. But if he brought it in, it's no good. So we can learn the answer that, in fact, yes, the neck of the bird is the same as a service vessel that has animal blood in it, and going in, bringing it in on purpose, will make it invalid. We challenge that answer. V'lita'amich gabe kodshe kodashim dekatani pirkesa v'yasa ladarom v'chazra keshera ha'hosia pesula. If according to that, regarding kodesh kodashim animals that have to be slaughtered in the north and you have to receive the blood in the north, the baraita teaches that if you do shechita in the north, but then the animal convulses and on its own it moves from the north to the south, but comes back, that is okay. Are you going to make using your methodology? Are you going to make the same derivation here, that if the kohen took it out by hand and brought it to the south, it would be no good? That's not true, because as long as you did the shechita in the north, you do that act of shechita in the north, okay, even if afterwards the animal moves or is moved on purpose to the south, it's okay, as long as you did the shechita in the north. Okay, then you can bring it back and do the Kabbalah. So as long as you did that, it doesn't matter if it's no longer in the north. It could go to the south after the main activities are done. So you would not derive from here that if you did it on purpose, it's pasul. So too, there's something wrong with your methodology in deriving that if you brought the bird into the sanctuary on purpose, it would be no good. Rather, ela hay yasta lachutz isterich aleh, hachaname yasta lachutz isterich aleh. Rather, the reason why the braita regarding kodshe kodashim says it in this way, that if it convulsed and went to the south, it's okay. The contrast is not if you brought it on purpose, but rather the contrast is if it convulsed and left the courtyard altogether, then it would be no good. That is obvious. So it's saying not only if you brought it on purpose outside the courtyard, even if it just convulsed by itself and went outside the courtyard and you didn't want it to, still it's no good. That's what is coming to contrast. And therefore here also, when the baraita says that if the bird convulsed and went inside, it's okay, that comes to teach me that if it convulsed and left the sanctuary, left the courtyard, then it's no good, which is true. But if it went in, or if you brought it inside the sanctuary, even knowingly, nevertheless, that's okay. And so we can interpret the baraita to say that it's permitted, that it's okay if it goes in. It's not invalid. It doesn't become invalidated if you bring the entire bird with the blood in it inside. That could be that it is okay according to this baraita, and therefore this baraita can be interpreted either way, and there is no proof. Ba'ay Rabbi Avin. Next question of Rabbi Avin. Nishpach al harispa v'asafa mahu. What if you have bird blood? It's in the bird. It's inside its neck, and then it pours on the ground, and you gather it up. Can you still use that blood and sprinkle it on the mizbeach? The law for an animal is, it depends if it was received in a vessel yet or not. If it was received in the vessel directly from the neck, you did shechita on the animal, you received it in the vessel, and then it spills on the ground, you can gather it up and you can still use it. That's fine. But if you never received it in a vessel and it goes directly and spills from the neck of the animal onto the floor, then it's no good, because you have to receive it in a vessel. You have to do Kabbalah in a vessel for an animal. Now the question is, how do we translate that to a bird where there is no vessel? Asruchehu de la asreche rachamana kelisharet vilkach osfo kasher. Do we say, well, regarding a bird, the Torah did not require a vessel, and therefore, if it falls directly from the bird onto the floor, then you can gather it up after in a vessel, and you can't put it back in the neck. You gather up in a vessel, and then you can sprinkle it. That's fine. So only for an animal where you have to use a vessel, it has to be received in a vessel, and only then, if it falls on the floor, that's okay. But a bird, since it doesn't have to be received in a vessel in the first place, so it's okay. You could skip that step. It goes directly on the floor. Okay, it's still good. Just pick it up in a vessel and still use it. That's one option, that lenient. Or perhaps the Torah is not saying, not only do you not need a vessel for a bird, you cannot use a vessel for a bird. It has to go directly from the neck onto the mizbech, and therefore, if it falls onto the floor, well, you can't use a vessel, so if you gather it up, it's going to be no good. It's already went on the floor. It has to go directly from the neck of the bird, and therefore, if you gather it up, it will be disqualified. That's the two sides of the question. Let's try to answer it. Amaravat Hashema. Yachol yeheh dam hatat ta'of ta'un kibus tamod omar zot. We're going to try to answer it from the Braita that we learned above on this stuff. That said, can it be? You might think that blood of a bird hatat that falls onto a garment might require kibus, because I know the Torah says it about an animal chatat. Maybe it's true also for a bird chatat. That's why it says the word zot. Zot is a limiting word. Okay, we saw that above. Now, why do you need zot to teach me this? If you think that the Torah says it's no good, the bird blood will become invalid if it goes onto a vessel, it has to go directly from the neck of the bird, well then I can derive that the bird blood will not require laundering on the garment because it has to pass through the airspace of the vessel first, and it already becomes disqualified in the airspace, and since it's already disqualified but in the airspace, once it reaches the garment, it's already disqualified blood, and disqualified blood does not need to be laundered. Only if it was valid blood when it hit the garment, only then it needs to be laundered. So, in other words, if you say that any blood from a bird cannot be put in a vessel and becomes invalid in a vessel, we learned that the airspace of a vessel is like the vessel itself. So therefore, if you have this bird and some blood squirts out and splatters, so it's going to go through the air and it's going to be above the garment at some momentary second. At that point, it's like it's on the vessel, and any bird blood in a vessel is no good. So it already becomes disqualified. Then it hits the garment, it doesn't need to be laundered because that's disqualified blood. So I wouldn't need the word zot to tell me that bird blood is out. I would already know it. Since the Baraita does say I need the word zot, that means that this option is wrong, but rather we can prove that the lenient option is the right one. That going on a vessel, you don't need a vessel, but you can have a vessel, and it's still qualified, still valid blood, even when it's in the airspace, and it goes on the garment, and therefore the garment would require laundering, if not for the word zot. So isn't that a good proof? Amar Rav Huna bered Rav Yeshua b'madbi keli b'savara. Rav Huna said bered Rav Yeshua says, no, it's not a good proof because I would still need the word zot to teach me about a case where one takes the vessel, meaning the garment, and puts it directly on the bird's neck. Then it's not going through the airspace, but rather this is blood that's in the neck. It's valid blood, and it goes directly onto the garment, and I would think it needs laundering. That's why I need zot. So I could say that, in fact, airspace or a vessel would make it disqualified, but here there is no intervening vessel or airspace. So I could say the second option, but still find a case where I need zot, and therefore there's no answer from this source. Next question. Ba'amine levi. Nitazmi beged lebeged mahu. What if you had back to regular chatat, animal blood, that sprinkles onto a garment? Okay, we know that garment is going to require laundering. What if it bounces off that garment and spills off that garment? It's already on that garment, and then it contaminates, sprinkles onto a second garment. How about the second garment? Does that also require laundering? Do we say that once it goes on the first garment, it already becomes invalidated, and because you have to launder it, so that's it, that's invalidated, and therefore when it goes on the second one, the second one does not have to be laundered because it's no longer valid blood? Or do we not say that? Do we say that no, it's still valid blood even when it's in the second garment? And when it goes on, when the first garment and when it goes to the second garment, you still have to launder the second garment too. Amar le zo she'ela. He said, oh, this is a good question. I have an answer for you. Ta'un kibus mima nafshach. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, yes, it will require laundering no matter what. I osfo v'kasher hakasher v'osfo pasul ana kerebi akiba sebirali damar hayta lo shata kosher v'nifsela damar taun kibus. No matter which way you go, it's going to require laundering. If you say that, if you gather that blood together, the one that's in the first garment, let's say you're able to get that blood out of the garment, you squeeze it out, and it's still valid. If you say it's still valid, even though it needs to be laundered, but that blood itself is valid, so then it's valid blood, and certainly when it goes on the second garment will require laundering. That's for sure. That's easy. And even if you say that once the blood goes in the first garment, that blood is invalid, I happen to follow the opinion not like our Mishnah, but rather like Rabbi Akiva, whose opinion we're going to see on the next daf. And he said that if the blood at one time was valid and became invalid afterward, and that blood falls on a garment, the garment still requires laundering. This is not like our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says if it's invalid at this point and goes on the garment, then you don't have to launder it. And it doesn't matter whether it once was valid or was never valid. That's our Mishnah. But Rabbi Akiva says as long as it was valid, and in this case it was valid blood before it went on the first garment, even if it became invalidated later, so it became invalidated by going on the first garment, nevertheless, because it was once valid, now that blood goes onto the second garment. It's invalid blood. But according to Rabbi Akiva, you still have to launder it. And so Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, according to my opinion at least, who I follow Rabbi Akiva, the answer to your question is that you're going to have to launder the second garment, no matter what you say about whether the first garment makes it invalid or not. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.